Welcome to Conservative Solutions for Our Common Challenges. My name is Dan Albus. I'm the Member of Parliament for Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna in the beautiful interior of British Columbia. And this podcast is all about the people who are stepping up with real ideas to tackle the issues Canadians face every day. Each episode, we talk with individuals inside and outside of Parliament who are putting forward practical, thoughtful solutions. Not the headlines, not the noise, but the real work. The ideas, the experience, and determination behind efforts to improve life for Canadians across this great country. I'm constantly inspired by the people who roll up their sleeves, see a problem, and decide to do something about it, and I hope that they'll inspire you too. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by someone who brings both deep professional expertise and a strong sense of family, community, and duty to his work. Frank Caputo is the Member of Parliament for Kamloops Thompson Caribou, and before entering politics, he served as a Crown prosecutor with years of experience working directly on serious criminal cases. In Parliament, he's carried that experience forward, working to strengthen laws that protect the vulnerable and advocating for justice reforms grounded in real-world experience. Frank has teamed up with Mel Arnold, Member of Parliament, on initiatives to combat child sexual abuse materials, and he has taken on a deeply personal legislation like Bailey's Law, working closely with the family of Bailey McCourt of Kelowna after her tragic death. Frank, thanks for making time to be here. It's great to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with how you're doing these days. What's keeping you busy?
Well, a lot is keeping me busy. I'm the Shadow Minister for Public Safety, which keeps me very busy on its own. The main things that are going on in that file are hearing a lot about the gun confiscation and things like that. You know, we have 28 First Nations in my riding, for instance, and First Nations obviously have a right to hunt. So I'm hearing a lot about that from a number of hunters in BC. Recently, the government entered into a memorandum of understanding with the government of China on security intelligence. Haven't seen that MOU yet. Have several bills that I'm chief critic on. Bill C2, Bill C8, and Bill C12 now has gone to the Senate. So I'm keeping pretty busy all in all. And we have Bailey's Law, which is my private member's bill.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with you first, Frank. So you came into politics after a long career as a Crown prosecutor, also as a university professor. So looking back, what made you consider taking that step into public life?
Well, it's a great question. I'll give you the shorter version. Otherwise, we might be here for a while. When I was about 18, 19, I always knew I would get into politics. It was in my heart, and it just kind of stayed there. And some people say, I want to be a lawyer, and that's their deep down in their heart, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to work with children. For me, it was politics. I just didn't know the when. And that stayed with me for about 22, 23 years. The nomination came up and I said, look, I'll be away from my family, but I've got a lot of ideas, things I want to act on. This is a deep burning desire, so now's the time.
So you said that you had thought about politics from really early on as you were going through your legal career. Was there any particular moment, either as a law student, a professor, or as a Crown prosecutor, where you latched onto something and said, this needs to be changed?
Well, interestingly enough, I think that my legal career and my political career are quite intertwined. And one of what I would call like an inflection moment for me, I still remember, I think it was October 1997, and it was when the Robert Latimer decision came out. And for those who don't know, this was one of the greatest moral issues of my teenage years, perhaps even my adult life that we were dealing with. Latimer killed his daughter, and he called it a mercy killing. She was had a number of disabilities, and he didn't believe he should go to jail for it. And the trial decision came down in 1997 when I was first starting my studies. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I had strong feelings about it. And that's what really propelled me into law school and wanting to think about these things and the law generally. I mean, that's what we do. We create laws as legislators.
So when you first arrived here in Ottawa and you saw that maple leaf over the Peace Tower, what did you think? About the job itself, your place, in it, being a new member of Parliament. What was it a humbling experience? Was it an overwhelming experience? What did you experience when you first came here?
I am still to this day overwhelmed. I often say I'm not in Kansas anymore. Perhaps I should say I'm not in North Kamloops anymore, because I just always say like I'm a pretty normal guy from kid from North Kamloops. Although people remind me I'm now 47, so I can't say that. I'll never forget walking into the House of the Commons for the first sitting and seeing the Prime Minister about 20 feet away from me. And walking and saying, that's this person, people who you've watched on TV, and here you are conversing with them, having coffee with them, incredibly humbled as the child of immigrants to walk on the green carpet of the House of Commons. There's nothing like it. I'm so privileged, I'm so blessed. It's also testament to the Canadian dream that my parents and my family have all lived.
So that sounded very positive when you first came here, but what were some of the first challenges you had as a new member of Parliament?
Well, reaching out to constituents and dealing with how much mail we get. I mean, in 1 year, I think we had 80,000 pieces of correspondence. Wow. So trying to say, okay, I'd love to respond to everybody, and then responding to constituents. People have different ways of doing things on Parliament Hill. I actually thought that this would be the hardest part. It's actually something I've come to really like, but staying on top of that, staying on top of phone calls. In my riding of Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola, it's roughly the size of Costa Rica for people who want to know geographically. Larger than Slovenia. We have 28 First Nations, 29 that we touch on. And then we have probably 15 distinct communities, as large as Kamloops, as small as Clinton, Blue River. These are very small communities, each with their unique challenges. So addressing all those unique challenges on the local level while being present in Ottawa on the federal and national level, that to me is probably the biggest challenge.
Well, I know from my own experience that nothing beats a phone call from the Member of Parliament. When you say, hi, this is Dan Albus phoning from Ottawa, people are just happy to hear from you. But your riding has changed quite a lot in the last election. What has been the biggest change for you to try and serve a riding, like you said, that has so many different First Nations, large communities like Kamloops, very smaller communities like some in the Nicola Valley, like Logan Lake, for example, is a new one. What has been the challenges with that? Just
getting out to the riding. I've only been elected since April in the new riding, and we added new areas for those from British Columbia: Merritt, Logan Lake, Lillooet, Lytton, Ashcroft, Cache Creek. These aren't necessarily close to each other. They're all within 1 to 2 hours of each other, but that's still 1 or 2 hours of each other. And then you have meetings and things like that, getting to know the local issues, and just getting out there. You can only be in one place at a time. We're in Ottawa 26 weeks of the year. I have 3 young children, and I want to be a proper father to them. I want to be a good husband to my amazing wife, who without her, I couldn't be doing this. So balancing all of those things and having a life, there are only so many hours in a day, and probably work, especially with travel, 60 to 70 hours a week. Getting there, looking people in the eye and hearing them out, that's often the biggest challenge, is just physically getting to places. Yeah, being in a large riding has tremendous difficulties. 100%. So since the last election, you now have a neighbor that shares the Kamloops area with you, Mel Arnold. And I want to talk to you about your work with Mel Arnold previous to that. So what first brought the issue of combating child sexual abuse materials to your attention as a legislator? And how did the collaboration with Mel Arnold work? Well, it actually started when I was a prosecutor. So I mostly specialize in what I would call digital evidence and offenses against children, or internet offenses against kids. So that has to be proven in a different way. And actually it started from a case in Vernon where a senior was luring children in the Philippines. And that's when I really became immersed in it. And I started taking on more of this work. And then talking about it called child pornography, it really bothered me. Pornography is consenting adults engaging in adult acts. Children can never consent, so don't call it pornography, call it what it is: child sexual abuse material. And sometimes we sanitize things in the law. So as a prosecutor, I was consistently dealing with that offense, with production, possession, dissemination. I was also dealing with internet luring, things like that. And I stood on doorsteps in 2021 and said, I will change that definition, do my best to do it. For those who don't know, it's a lottery on what are called private members' bills. I was like 180th. My good friend and awesome former seatmate, Mel Arnold, and now Kamloops' neighbor, was much higher. So I approached him and said, hey, I've written this legislation. Would you table it and run with it? And together we can get it through the House of Commons. And we did. That is something I will take with me to my grave as a very proud moment.
It's amazing. Mel is a fantastic advocate for his constituents.
He is.
But for the Canadians that may not know the details of the legislation and what you and Mel accomplished, because it's now law, why is it such an important gap to address? And what are some of the practical outcomes that have happened since the change?
Well, I can't tell you how many people have come to me. I've had discussions with legislators internationally as well to call something what it is. When you say to a victim, this is what we're doing. I've had victims come to me. I won't give too many details just to protect somebody, but I talked to this young woman about my work, and she just hugged me on the spot and told me her story, a very tragic story. Those are the things that I like to say, get me out of bed. Dealing with those people, representing those people is tremendous. Now, in terms of the outcomes, I think when we call it sexual abuse, I think that we are going to start to see sentencing change. The sanitization that goes on, and we think that, oh, it's not that bad. No, it's not. It is awful. It is beyond awful. It is reprehensible that somebody would do this, and that person's life is repeatedly victimized every time those materials are possessed, they're watched, they're disseminated. So we cannot take our foot off the gas pedal on this, and I, for one, will keep my foot on the gas pedal, and I know Mel will too.
So based on your experience as a former prosecutor, what do you see as the biggest challenge in stopping this kind of crime? And what changes do you think would help make a real difference for those victims? And I also have to say, for the people that the police, victim services, psychiatrists that are all involved in supporting victims, where would you start? Or what do you think is the next step?
Well, there are a few different ones. First of all, shout out BC ICE. They're the ones who deal with these things day in and day out. I worked with them as a prosecutor and now get to visit them as a legislator. This is a group of probably 20 people with the RCMP in Surrey, and this is all they do is this kind of work. When people say, oh, that work must have been hard, I would say, yes, it wasn't fun, but it was rewarding. So I think we have to recognize the problem. People often think, oh, that just happens over there or it happens just somewhere else. When you talk to the people at BC ICE or anywhere, and they show you how often this is happening, it's almost like it's not spoken of. So number one, we have to acknowledge how widespread it is. Number two, we need to punish it for what it is. Our criminal code doesn't really have, it puts denunciation and deterrence and rehabilitation at the forefront. I think we actually have to start saying, you know what? Retribution should be it should be a principle for this. The state should say, the government should say, you know what? You have messed up. And we are going to recognize that your victims are serving a psychological life sentence, and that means that your sentence should be considered in years rather than in months. For far too long, we are seeing sentences in the days to months range that ignore the pernicious harm. Number three, we need to get with the times on digital evidence as Parliament. I won't get into the nuances of it, but we have to start figuring out how to more easily prosecute these cases because they take months, if not years, given disclosure frameworks and things like that. That's kind of legal nerdery, but just take my word for it. We do not currently have the legislative tools to fast track these types of prosecutions.
So the legislation itself, it's passed. So congratulations to you and to Mel and to anyone who was involved in the process. What was the biggest obstacle in getting the bill to that level?
Just getting people to care. I mean, and I'm not saying people didn't care, but they didn't want to rush it. I mean, this to me was something to be rushed. I'll never forget sitting in the House, Dan, and it was a matter of if debate collapsed that day, then we would vote on it the following Wednesday. This is just parliamentary procedure. And somebody in another party was angry with something that somebody in my party has done. So they refused to let debate collapse, like really petty. And you're thinking, now the vote is delayed for how many weeks or months, things like that. Those were the types of things, there's a lot going on and we do a lot of important work, but I thought this will get through Parliament so quickly, I thought. But getting people to say, this is something we will all get behind on all sides of the aisle was more difficult than I expected. That's not to say people on the other side didn't care, but you've got all these government bills, you have all these other things, and getting people to say, you know what, this private member's bill requires the attention it deserves, let's get it through. That was something that was a bit unexpected.
When I first came to Ottawa, one of the things that I first thought is that I thought politics was all about policies and advancing just the public good, but I found that personalities play a huge outside role. So to hear that, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm glad though that you and Mel were able to push it through. I'd like to turn to Bailey's Law now. For listeners who don't know the story, who was Bailey McCourt and how did her case first come to your attention?
So Bailey McCourt was a young woman who was abused by her partner, and he went to court over it. He was found guilty and he left court on bail, and within a few hours he is charged with viciously murdering her. He was charged with first-degree murder of his ex-intimate. Now, this is something that was an area of passion for me, and a lot of people don't know, but I had written a bill on intimate partner violence in the last Parliament. So I updated it once I heard about this. It happened in July of 2025. So I added first-degree murder provisions, as in if you kill an intimate, it should be first-degree murder. Again, reflecting the times that have changed. I was then contacted by Bailey McCourt's family. We need to recognize what they've been through. Her mom, Karen, her Aunt Debbie, her dad, Shane. These are people who I have spoken with extensively. Carrie was also in the vehicle with Bailey at the time and suffered substantial injuries, so let's not forget her. These are lives that will forever be changed. So the family approached me and they said, will you name this Bailey's Law? I drove down to Maple Ridge. We had a meeting among family members, and from there, things just took off, and the last 6 months have been a whirlwind.
So you've been working with the family, and I know from my own community, because I'm from the Okanagan, people were traumatized. People who worked with Bailey in real estate, people that knew her personally, were contacting their members of parliament for the very first time. And so working with the family on such a delicate issue, what was that like?
It's an honor, first of all, but you also see behind the headlines. And I used to experience this as a prosecutor. Before that, I was a parole officer. And sometimes you just see the offense, but you forget that these are real people who have real trauma, and that trauma is enduring. If there's one thing that our system fails, in my view, is to recognize that just because somebody is sentenced or just because somebody's sentence is done doesn't mean that the victim has got through it. I often say victims of sex offenses are living psychological life sentences. So to deal with Bailey's family, you see people who are still suffering, and understandably so. That's something that we as a system have to recognize. It's something that I think keeps me grounded, and it's something I hope I never forget in this job.
So what does Bailey's Law intend to fix? You mentioned the treating intimate partner violence, that if someone kills their spouse, that immediately it goes to first-degree murder. But intimate partner violence is a whole range of activities. So what else does Bailey's Law do? And what has the reaction been from the public?
Well, it does a number of things. I won't get into the nuances of it. One of the things that it does is if somebody has been previously convicted of an offense against an intimate partner within the last 5 years, they have to be held so a judge can release them. Normally, a police officer will release them at the scene, say, show up to court in these dates and here are your conditions. They're called undertakings to a peace officer, for instance, is often what happens, or a release order if it's before a judge or a justice. What this would do is you have to go before the judge. The other thing it does, and I think that this is actually very important, is it creates an offense of assault intimate partner. Right now, if you assault your intimate or you assault somebody at the bar, it is the exact same charge. So you get into a fight or you assault somebody on the street, you're charged with assault. You assault your intimate partner, you're charged with assault. The two are very different situations. One can happen randomly. The other is in often an area or an environment of coercive control, an element of financial dependence, physical dependence, manipulation. So I think we should call it what it is, and someone's criminal record should reflect that.
So in my conversations with Bailey's family, and they've obviously the system they feel has failed Bailey and has failed them in so many different ways, but they're channeling that energy into something positive, and they've said that you've been a real champion for them. So every bill faces its own journey. So what has been the moments where you felt some real momentum behind Bailey's Law?
Oh, it's interesting you say that, because there are so many little speed bumps that you encounter. And I'm not saying that people are obstructing the bill. It's just the fact of life in Parliament. You know, you've got a government, they've got a legislative agenda. This is a private member's bill. This isn't a government bill. Mm-hmm. So they've got their own agenda. So it seems like every week, you know, and little things like, oh, we're not going to committee on this day. It's getting pushed back a week for this. Well, that pushes a potential vote back another 2 weeks. Things like that. Or Bill C-16, the government came out and it's got very similar provisions to Bailey's Law. So, okay, well, are you supportive of Bailey's Law and all that it has, or are you going to put through the government legislation? Just getting people to pay attention and focus on this, everybody in the House. I think that all 343 members in the House are completely supportive of this. I'm not going to disparage anybody over this. But again, it's a matter of getting the focus to do this when you've got the government who sets the legislative agenda, and I'm just one member who is negotiating. That's probably been one of the bigger issues I've seen.
It's been one of the most heartwarming things for me as a member of Parliament was the day that the second reading, so that's generally agreement or not in principle, mm-hmm. that allows a bill to go forward to committee, and it's the first chance for Parliament to weigh in. And, you know, as you said, 343 members of Parliament can give a yay or a nay. And seeing Bailey's family in the gallery and the reaction that everyone was voting in favor, that I have to say, Frank, it was one of the most heartwarming things I have seen as a member of Parliament. And I want to thank you because your prime role in that.
Thank you.
Politics can be really incredibly demanding when you're trying to change laws, particularly around public safety, because there is a complex system. What are some of the stresses or pressure that comes with that responsibility?
Everybody who contacts my office has experienced something, and they've experienced it on the individual level. We as parliamentarians are often dealing on what I call like the macro level, the national level. So dealing with victims and hearing them out, addressing their specific concerns. You know, I can't tell you with Bailey's Law, we were just talking about, I've had a flood of notes from people, conversations, not just people who've been abused by their intimate partners, but people whose daughters have been killed. I can't tell you how many parents, loved ones I've spoken with. I had a young man, 19 or 20, literally cry on my shoulder when he was describing his mom's situation. So dealing with all of those people takes time, and it's not like you can give somebody 5 minutes. So addressing people's concerns, hearing them out, that's often a challenge in this role because we're dealing with crime. Also dealing with CSIS, RCMP, CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, all of those organizations, Correctional Service of Canada, with the massive bureaucracies, that's also a huge challenge. So again, you've got the big picture on the national level mm-hmm. with the individual level, and you have that tension. It can be really hard to be good at your job at the individual level and on the national level. I'm trying to do both, and frankly, it takes a lot of work, and you're actually somebody who taught me a ton on that. People like you and Mel and some of our other BC colleagues have really taught me a lot.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but you've always taken to the work head on, and that's something that I admire.
Thank you.
So you've talked about the macro issues. So you serve right now as the Shadow Minister for Public Safety for the Conservative opposition. So as a critic, what keeps you up at night? What issues you worry that Canada isn't paying enough attention to? You cited a few of the agencies that you have oversight on.
Okay. I would say that extortion keeps me awake at night. I would say that victims who tell you their stories of slipping through the cracks, that is the worst thing. that keeps me up at night. I met with somebody in my riding. I won't give any details, but this person's story was profound, and I haven't stopped thinking about it, and that was about 2 weeks ago. I also think again about victims of sexual offenses. I worry about people who can't pay their bills, people, seniors saying, I'm deciding between heating and eating. That stuff keeps me up at night. Here I am with a stable job, or well, stable at the voter's intention, shall we say, with a good salary. There are people who are not as fortunate as me, who may be eliminating a vehicle or having to rent out a smaller place or worried about their mortgage payments. That's the stuff too, where I think, oh my God, like how do people make it? And you still have a job to do, but those are the things that keep me up at night.
Yeah, well, if you could change one thing, Frank, about federal politics and how it works, what would you change?
That's a loaded question. There are a couple of things. The first thing I would do would be to raise sentences on sexual offenses, particularly sexual offenses against children. I've spoken a lot about that, and I think everybody would probably agree that our sentences are far too low. The other thing I would change is I would listen to people on the ground. I'm an MP and a critic who really likes to get their hands dirty. I'm the critic for the border or corrections, so you'll see me in jails. You will see me at the border. And what the people tell me on the ground is not what the people at the top tell me. And I see that the two don't talk, and I blame the bureaucracy for that. The people at the top in corrections, they are talking now, they have to have a reduction. They are not reducing anybody in management, I'm told, even through attrition. It is all the frontline officers, the people who are worried about drones dropping in drugs and somebody who's high stabbing them with a weapon that was dropped with a drone. People who are dealing with some of the worst offenders. That's where the cuts are going to happen. And all I can think is, these are the people experiencing it. Do you ever talk to them? And I just don't see that happening, Dan. So I would change that in the big picture.
Well, you've developed a real presence on the front line, visiting prisons, border stops. You've told me a lot about them, and then obviously your roles as a member of parliament in your own constituency, you're there. So if you could change one thing in your riding instantly, what would that be?
I would have the federal government listen and respond accordingly. I sent out 9 pre-budget letters, and I didn't get a single response back on any of them. You've got concerns in smaller communities. I mean, Lytton literally burned down, and the feds have had some money come through there. But you had Merritt in your former riding. They had devastating floods when you were still the MP, and the government had no problem showing up to places like Princeton and Merritt, saying we'll have your backs, and these beautiful photo ops. And the government has given $5 million. That's it. The province stepped up with $120 million in change, and the Fed stepped up with $5.
I've had the honor to work with Mike Getz, the mayor of Merritt.
Great mayor.
And he's outlined many of the things that you're talking about that are still deficient. He and actually Mayor Coyne, I also had the privilege of serving when I was the MP for Princeton, came to committee and said, we're still vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed that the federal government was giving money to communities that were not even related to the problems that laid out in the fund, while you have these smaller communities. It just doesn't make sense.
No, even places like Lillooet, their rail service is going to be closed down. It looks like going all the way up to Prince George. These are a lot of jobs. Cache Creek, issues with flooding in those areas. Clinton, they want to build housing. Is the infrastructure there? And trying to get the government to pay attention to these smaller communities as well as the larger communities. And sometimes you feel, look, I get it. I'm not a government MP, but that doesn't mean that the needs of the people of Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola should necessarily come second. You're either a government to all or a government to nobody. And I'd like to see the government be a government to all.
Yeah, I like how you put that, a government for everyone. So looking ahead, Frank, I know that you're a proactive person. What is the next cause you're going to champion? I know you're 100% committed to Bailey's Law and seeing improvements there. You talked a little bit about making sure the offense fits the crime when it comes to child predators. But what other issues do you want to champion in this parliament?
Well, I also want to champion the local issues, like I just mentioned, in places like Lillooet and Ashcroft and Kamloops. We have a huge housing issue in Kamloops. We often forget about the smaller communities. Areas in my riding like Clearwater and Barrier in the North Thompson, they don't have natural gas, and trying to get the providers to come to the table. Those are the types of things that I want to focus on. You know, we've dealt with the big picture. You know, now it's time, I hope, to deal with some of the issues that are more germane to the riding, so that you can actually be a good, what I call a constituency MP, and a good MP in Ottawa.
Frank, thank you for this conversation, and even more for the way you do your work with a heart and conviction. What you're dealing with isn't theoretical. It's real families, real victims, real people who carry unimaginable pain. And you've chosen to stand with them and help take that pain and transform it into purpose. So that takes courage, it takes compassion, and I believe Canadians would agree with me that they're better off because you're willing to do that hard work. And so thank you again for making time for us today at Conservative Solutions.
My honor.
And for everyone listening, thank you for being part of this episode of Conservative Solutions to Our Common Challenges. These discussions can be pretty heavy, but they remind us why public service matters. Because behind every bill, behind every reform, behind every late night in Parliament, there are Canadians like Frank who just want a safer, more just country for the people that they love. And that's why we do this podcast, to highlight the people who refuse to give up, who bring real ideas and lived experience, and who are striving, often quietly, to make our country stronger and more compassionate. If today's conversation resonated with you, I hope you'll share it. Send it out to someone who may need to hear it. I'm Dan Elbus. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. I'll see you next time.